Can you believe it? This is session 17 in the study of the book of Judges. We are going to be looking at chapter 12. It is what I like to call the epilogue of Japheth, the judge, and then it also mentions 3 more judges. In fact, this one chapter, which is actually a quite short chapter, only 15 verses, mentions 4 judges. And so we're going to just dive right in. This will probably be a short Bible study for this chapter, but we want to cover it all. Japheth has won, the Israelites with Japheth as their leader, has beaten the Ammonites out and restored peace to a point, apparently, because we're going to find out something in this next chapter. But also, we also saw the flippant attitude that Japheth seems to have with making a vow to God. If you'll give me the Ammonites into my hands, then I will give you whatever comes out of my house first when I get home. And of course, his one and only daughter comes out to greet him and ends up being sacrificed to God, whether it was a literal sacrifice, which would be totally against God's character. And I'm not going to put it, that he did not do it that way, but most scholars these days believe that what he ended up doing was similar to what Hannah, the mother of Samuel, will later do. Well, actually, not too far later, but in a few years, will do at the beginning of 1 Samuel, where he gave his daughter over to God to serve God in the tabernacle in whatever way, shape, or form. And she would never marry. She would never have children. She would be a maiden, kind of like a nun nowadays. Something similar, and maybe that's where they got the concept of a nun, from this kind of thing. But anyway, when he made that vow, he showed how flippant his relationship with God was, how he did not really know God, that he, as we see, my dog is whining for some reason, or almost growling. So we see from after Deborah, up to Deborah, you have the four early judges, Othniel and Ehud, Deborah. Well, they were the first. No. Sorry. Othniel, Ehud, Deborah. They trusted God and they worshiped God and they really tried to do the best for God and for his people. And then you get to Gideon, who is wishy-washy. He really starts showing us that he doesn't understand God's character, because when God promises something, his character does not allow him to break a promise. Yet Gideon puts him to the test over and over again to make sure for himself that God will keep his promise, rather than rely on God's character, to know God's character, that when he promises something, he does not break that promise. He cannot break that promise. It is against his character. It is impossible for him to break his promise. That is part of his character. And then we see in Jephthah even more lack of recognizing this. Even in with Tolu is not so bad. We don't really, with him, it almost seems like he gets it a little bit, and he's there to help heal the land, and he even moves to the hill country of Ephraim, which is close to the tabernacle and closer to God. So with him, it could be that he really is trying, but then his his successor ends up, Jair with 30 sons. So obviously polygamy is normal for him. And then Jephthah comes along, and he obviously does not understand God's character either, to make such a unthinking promise. But enough of that. Let's get on to chapter 12. They have beaten the Ammonites out and back to their own borders. So then the men of Ephraim called out their forces, crossed over to Saphon, and said to Jephthah, "Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you? We're going to burn down your house over your head." Jephthah answered, "I and my people were engaged in a great struggle with the Ammonites, and although I called, you didn't save me out of their hands. When I saw that you wouldn't help, I took my life in my hands and crossed over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave me the victory over them. Now, why have you come up today to fight me?" We're going to stop there. I'm kind of taking this chapter in small pieces. Here's the beginning. People of Ephraim. Now, do you think back to when we were looking at the chapters on Gideon? Who were the people at the end of the fight who said, "Why didn't you call us up at the beginning when you first were going to fight?" They wait until after the fight is done to complain about not being part of the fight. Well, here we have the men of Ephraim doing this again, saying, "Why didn't you call us up when you were going to go fight?" And it's like, it's almost like, man, if we had known you were going to win, we would have come and gotten some of the spoils of war too, or the recognition that we were part of the fighting force, so bragging rights type thing. It's kind of like, this is their mentality. But Jephthah, opposed to Gideon had not called them. But when they complained, he did remind them in a very diplomatic way of how they helped after the fight and how they had captured two of the leaders of the, I think they were fighting the Midianites? I'm pretty sure it was the Midianites. Anyway, and he reminds them diplomatically that you did help. I didn't call you initially, but then God, he cut us down to just 300 men anyway. But I called you when I really needed you, and you were there, and you were brave guys. Jephthah, on the other hand, said, "Well, we were having problems. We asked for help. You didn't come, so we did it ourselves. And you know what? God gave us the victory, and now you're going to come and fight us?" Now, Ephraim did come, saying, "We're going to burn the house with you in it, over your head." And so Jephthah responds, like, "Who do you think you are? After the fight, you come complaining. Well, where were you when we were in the middle of the fight?" Verse 4. Jephthah then called together the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. The Gileadites struck them down because the Ephraimites had said, "You Gileadites are renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh." The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim. And whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he responded no, they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. Jephthah led Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in a town in Gilead. So Jephthah's response is, "Okay, we're going to fight you. You dare to come over here and say you're going to burn my house down?" So he gets the Gileadites, the men of Gilead, the eastern section of Jordan. If if you were in the last lesson, and they fight the Ephraimites and they beat them. And they capture the ford across the Jordan River. And remember, Gilead, from your direction, Gilead is the east of Jordan River, and Ephraim, the hill country of Ephraim, is west. Or reverse that. Gilead is west of the Jordan River, and Ephraim is east of the Jordan River. And to get back home, if they've escaped the battle, the Ephraimites have to cross the ford in the Jordan. And also, if you were part of my study when we were doing, let me look it up, chapter 18, I referred to this event as an example of how the different tribes, different regions, had different accents. If you're in the northern United States, you recognize a southern accent when it's around you, and vice versa. New York accent or a Bostonian accent, pretty obvious. In Spanish, Spain, Uruguayan, Argentine is very different from Mexican and Cuban. The accents are very recognizable, and apparently, as was mentioned when we looked at chapter 18, they had different accents. And apparently the people of Ephraim had difficulty saying the sh sound. And so shibboleth is a word that translates usually to stream. So it makes sense to say, okay, say stream of water, stream, shibboleth. And if they couldn't say the sh sound, they said Sibboleth. They are Ephraimites, and they were killed. And they ended up killing 42,000 Ephraimites. Okay, and then Jephthah led Israel for 6 years. He died and was buried in a town in Gilead. Don't know where. Even the Spanish version says that he was buried in his town, but it also in some versions it'll say his town, in others it'll say a town, a city. Depends on if it's from the Septuagint or from the original Hebrew, English or Spanish. But doesn't name a town because we are never told where specifically Jephthah is from. But when he dies, he's buried back in his town, and we have no idea where. We just know that it is west of the Jordan because it's in Gilead. He leads for 6 years, not 40, and we basically now have met a man who is quite imperfect, a judge who is quite imperfect. He was a warrior, and that mentality went with him in all of his decisions. Rather than be a diplomat, ultimately, he showed diplomacy one time and one time only. And that was in the last chapter when he originally sent a letter asking the king of the Ammonites why, rather than just go to battle with them. He asked why. Is there something that we've done or something that we can do to rectify this problem between us, type thing? Well, that's the only time. Looking at Jephthah, we see again that the judges are becoming less and less stalwart, God-fearing, God-knowing, God-worshiping, people. Gideon fell short of it. We know that Jair, who was a polygamist, fell short of it. Jephthah wasn't a polygamist. He obviously wasn't. He had one daughter, and that was it. But now we're going to look in the next 8 verses at the next 3 judges. And I want you to judge for yourself. We're going to take each one at a time. verses 8 through 10. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem led Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave his daughters away in marriage to those outside his clan, and for his sons he brought in 30 young women as wives from outside his clan. Ibzan led Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. Several points there. First of all, some commentators say that this is not Bethlehem in Judah, because almost always in the Old Testament, when they talk about Bethlehem in Judah, they always say Bethlehem in Judah. And there were other Bethlehems, but Bethlehem in Judah, or Bethlehem Ephrata, is the Bethlehem where Jesus was born. This is not necessarily that same Bethlehem. It doesn't tell us what tribe he's from. It just tells us that he is from Bethlehem and buried in Bethlehem. But we also can see that he is a polygamist, which means he is also very rich. He was only judge for 7 years, so he was rich before being a judge, because you're not going to get 60 children in 7 years. I don't care how many wives you have. But it also talks about how he chose husbands for his daughters from outside the clan and wives for his sons from outside the clan. Now, it does say outside the clan. It does not say outside Israel. So I'm actually seeing him trying to do some sort of diplomacy, kind of mix these clans together, these different tribes, and try to get some fresh blood in and share the fact that we're all Israelites. So that's a kind of positive that I'm going to give him. I'm not sure if that's what the Bible is giving him, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he was trying to really not think of just Ephraim or Gileadite like the previous judge, but he was trying to kind of like bind the wounds of Israel, and so I'm going to give him that as a positive. But again, he was only judged for 7 years. And then the next one, verses 11 and 12, after him, Elon the Zebulunite led Israel 10 years. Then Elon died and was buried in Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. Okay, so all we know about Elon is that he is of the tribe of Zebulun, which there actually some commentaries mention that Ibzan, the one who was from Bethlehem, there might have been a Bethlehem in Zebulun. So he might have actually been a Zebulunite as well as Elon. But Elon, we know for sure, is a Zebulunite, which helps us to notice that God did not choose judges from just one or two tribes. He did spread them out, or tried to spread them out. He was judge for 10 years, and it doesn't have anything negative to say about him. Nothing great positive either. He just, he was 10 years the judge. And then he is followed by verses 13 through 15. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel from Pirathon, led Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He led Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, son of Hillel, died and was buried at Pirathon in Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. Okay, first thing that caught my mind was the last word, Amalekites. I'm here like, hill country of Ephraim or hill country of Amalekites? What I have read says that it was known as the hill country of Amalekites because those are the people the Ephraimites took the land from. that they were the predecessors. So it was known also as the hill country of the Amalekites, but Ephraim was in charge of it at this time. And so Abdon was an Ephraimite. He was from a town in Ephraim and served for 8 years and died and was buried in his hometown in the area of Ephraim. But he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons. Again, we're back to polygamy. It's got to be for 40 sons, you have to have more than one wife. And it's a character flaw. But again, there's nothing negative about him. There's just nothing positive about him. But we do see in all of these that, I get back to that, they've lost sight. They do not recognize, they do not know God's character, how God thinks, who he is. Again, God is love. He cannot hate a person. He can hate what's being done, but he loves the people. He died for the whosoever. So he loves. He cannot lie. He cannot break a promise. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth. He is truth. He cannot lie. Knowing God's character helps us as a Christian to be able to trust him better. So maybe what we need to be doing is get to know God's character better so that we can better trust in him more freely, with good conscience, with an ease of mind, give our lives over to him because we know his character. Maybe that needs to be the next study that we do, is a study on God's character. Find out what the Bible tells us about God himself. I have my mind open because we only have, now that we finished chapter 12, and we have finished chapter 12, we only have one judge left. Now he has 4 chapters, so that's going to be at least 4 lessons. But we're down to the last judge, and so I'm already thinking ahead. Once we finish with the judges, we will go back to just once a week Bible study. But for now, to finish the judges in the month of August, we will continue twice a week. But God's character, I think that is part of the problem with the judges as well as the Israelites themselves. Another thing is, have you noticed that never in the book of Judges do we actually mention priests, high priests, real priests, the tabernacle? It's never mentioned. Never mentioned any of it. No high priest. There are high priests. There are lists of who they were, but never mentioned in the book of Judges. And I do not believe it's mentioned in the story of Samson, which is the last judge. So yeah, prepare yourself. We're going to end with this. We're going to start with the story of Samson in our next lesson. But I invite you to maybe do your own little study on God's character and look up what you can find about God's character, because that is apparently a flaw amongst the Israelites of this day and the later judges. God uses flawed people, though they are people with a heart that wants to do God's will. They just aren't totally aware of God's will. So anyway, we're going to leave it at that. God bless you until the next lesson. Ciao. I did mention this was lesson 17, didn't I? I hope I did. Bye.